The night it happened, nobody in the ballroom was paying attention to the right things. They were watching the champagne towers. They were watching the politicians laugh too loudly. They were watching the women in their borrowed diamonds pretend the borrowed part didn't matter. Nobody was watching the door. Nobody except Hyun-Soo Jang. He stood at the far edge of the Grand Hannum ballroom with a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched in 40 minutes, his back to the pillar, his eyes scanning the room the way a soldier scans a field, not looking for something beautiful, looking for threats. That was all his eyes knew how to do anymore. 8 years. 8 years since the accident on the mountain road outside Busan. 8 years since he had stopped being the kind of man who laughed at parties or felt the rhythm of music in his chest or reached for someone's hand and meant it. His surgeons had fixed his body. His enemies had made sure the rest of him stayed broken. His chief of staff, Dong-won, leaned close and murmured something about the deal with the Japanese consortium. Hyun-Soo nodded without listening. He had already decided about the consortium 3 days ago. He had already decided about everything. That was the only way to survive. Decide early, feel nothing, and let the world move around you like water around stone. The chandelier above flickered once. The double doors swung open, and that was when everything he had decided stopped mattering. She came in the way lightning comes into a room. Not announced, not apologetic, just suddenly there, and the air pressure changed. Her name was Amara Cole. She was Nigerian, born in Lagos, raised between Lagos and London, currently in Seoul for reasons she would later describe to him as long and ridiculous and absolutely worth it. She had braids pinned half up and half spilling down her back, and she wore a deep burgundy dress that moved like it was made of something liquid. She carried herself the way women carry themselves when they have stopped waiting for permission to take up space. She walked in, paused, looked around the room the way you look at a buffet, assessing, unimpressed, slightly amused, and then her eyes landed on the champagne station, and she smiled like she had found the only honest thing in the building. The women near the entrance whispered. 2 men in suits turned and forgot what they were saying. A photographer lifted his camera automatically, not even knowing why. Hyun-Soo Jang did not move, but his whiskey glass lowered 3 inches. He watched her cross the room. She greeted no one formally, but smiled at a waiter, laughed at something her friend, a short Korean woman who looked like she was trying to hold Amara back and failing, said into her ear. She picked up a glass of champagne and tasted it and made a face that clearly said this is fine, but I've had better. And then she looked up and her eyes swept the room, and for 1/2 second they landed on him. She didn't look away first. He did. Hyun-Soo Jang had not looked away from anyone in 8 years. He set his whiskey down and told himself it was the lighting. Dong-won noticed. Of course he noticed. Sir, it's nothing, Hyun-Soo said, and turned his attention back to the room, back to the threats, back to the stone-cold discipline that had kept him alive and powerful and completely, thoroughly hollow. The DJ switched to something slower, something that hummed in the floor and moved through the walls. Around the ballroom, couples drifted toward the dance floor. Hyun-Soo did not dance. He had not danced since before the accident. He had not stood close enough to another person to feel their warmth since the accident. He had built the distance intentionally, the way you build a wall after a flood. Every brick placed with the memory of what water can destroy. He became aware, gradually, of footsteps behind him. He turned. She was standing 3 feet away. Up close, she was worse. Her eyes were the kind that saw things, not just surfaces, but the thing underneath the surface. She had a small scar above her left eyebrow that somehow made her face more interesting. She smelled like something warm and complicated, sandalwood, and something floral, something entirely her own. She looked at him the way very few people had ever looked at Hyun-Soo Jang, like he was a person and not a power. You look, she said, tilting her head, like someone locked you in this corner and forgot to give you the key. He stared at her. I'm Amara, she said, and before your security team materializes, I promise I'm just a guest. My company has a table over there. My friend dragged me here. I would personally rather be eating jollof rice at midnight, but she shrugged with one shoulder. Here we are. Still, he said nothing. Around them, 2 of his men had already shifted positions. He raised one hand barely an inch, and they stopped. You haven't told me your name, she said. You know my name, he said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. Disused. She paused. Then, Hyun-soo Jang. Yes. My friend Jiyeon had a 15-minute nervous breakdown when she realized I was walking toward you. A small smile. I told her you were just a man in a nice suit. I'm not just a man in a nice suit. No, she agreed pleasantly. You're a man in a nice suit who looks like he hasn't laughed in about a decade. But, she extended her hand. The song is good, and you're the only person in this room who isn't performing right now. So, dance with me. The room, if it could have held its breath, would have. Dong-won made a sound like a man swallowing a stone. Hyun-soo looked at her extended hand. Small, steady, completely unafraid. His chest did something it had not done in 8 years. Not a lurch exactly. More like a mechanism clicking, some internal clock that had stopped ticking once. I don't dance, he said. Good, she said. Neither do I, technically. I just move to music and call it dancing. Come on. And she took his hand. Later, he would not be able to explain what happened in the 40 seconds between her taking his hand and them standing in the middle of the floor. His body had simply followed. His feet had simply moved. He had stood in the middle of the Hanam ballroom with 500 people watching and a Nigerian woman he had never met in his life guiding him through the first dance he had attempted in 8 years. And the strangest thing was that it didn't feel strange. She moved easily, naturally, her rhythm so unforced it made his stiffness look like a choice rather than a wound. When he was slow, she slowed. When he was uncertain, she simply kept moving and let the certainty belong to her instead. Her laughter came freely, not at him, just out of her, the way music comes out of someone who genuinely feels it. There you are, she said, at some point, looking up at him. What? There's a person in there. She tapped her own chest lightly. I could see him deciding to come out. He could not have said what his face did in response to that, but did something unfamiliar. The song ended. Her friend appeared at the edge of the floor with the expression of someone watching a nature documentary, terrified and fascinated. Amara turned and laughed, and in the turning, her heel caught on the edge of the parquet, and she stumbled forward, and Hyun-soo's hand caught her arm automatically, and for one moment she was close enough that her hair brushed his chin, and the warm, complicated scent of her was everywhere. And then she caught her balance and stepped back and grinned at him like the stumble had been a gift. Okay, she said. I lied slightly. I do fall sometimes. Are you hurt? Never. She bent and slipped off her left heel, which had a snapped strap, held it up, assessed it, and sighed. My favorite pair. Then she looked at him, and her smile did something soft and unexpected. Thank you for the dance, Hyun-soo Jang. I hope it counted for something. She walked away barefoot. He stood there for a long moment after she was gone. Then he looked down. Her broken heel was on the floor at his feet. She hadn't taken it with her. He picked it up, not knowing why, not asking himself why, and held it in his closed fist for the rest of the night. He didn't sleep. At 3 a.m. in the tower penthouse that sat above everything and touched nothing, Hyun-soo Jang sat in his dark office holding a broken shoe heel and staring at a city that owed him its skyline and couldn't give him whatever had just happened at that party. His reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window looked unfamiliar. The jaw was the same. The sharp eyes, the rigid posture, all the same. But there was something around the eyes. Something unguarded. Something awake in a way that made him uncomfortable because it had teeth. Because it wanted something. He had spent 8 years making sure he didn't want anything he couldn't control. Amara Cole, he said quietly to the room. Dong-won appeared at the door. Hyun-soo had not called him. But then Dong-won had been with him for 11 years and knew when to appear. Find out everything, Hyun-soo said without turning. Who she is, where she's staying, what she's doing in Seoul. A pause. And if she leaves the city, she hasn't left yet. He didn't know how he knew that. He just did. Amara was eating rice cake and watching a Korean drama at 9 a.m. when Jiyeon called for the third time. You are on every news site, Jiyeon said by way of greeting. There are photos. The headline says mysterious foreign beauty enchants the dragon of Hanam. Amara, they called you a sorceress. Amara looked at her rice cake. How do they know my name? They don't yet. but they will. These people have resources. A beat. Are you worried? Ji-yeon. I danced with a man at a party. I'm not worried. But she picked up her phone and found the photos and looked at them for a long, quiet moment. Whoever had taken them had been good. They had caught something in the dance that Amara recognized and hadn't expected. The way he had looked at her. Not attraction. Not yet. Something more unnerving than attraction. Recognition. The look of someone seeing something they thought no longer existed. She set the phone down. She was absolutely not going to think about this. Her doorbell rang. She opened it to two men in dark coats, politely arranged, who bowed and said, "Miss Cole, Mr. Jang would like to see you at your earliest convenience." Amara looked at them, looked at the car at the curb, looked back at them. Did he say please? A beat. He did not use that word specifically. Tell him, I said to try again. She closed the door. There was a pause. Then a knock. She opened it again. The taller of the two men looked pained. Mr. Jang requests, please, that you come. It was clearly a first for him. Amara smiled. Better. Give me 10 minutes. The place they took her to was not the penthouse. It was a private room above a restaurant in Songbuk-dong. High ceilings, low lights, tea on the table, the sound of rain beginning outside. He was already there when she arrived, standing at the window, and he turned when she entered, and they looked at each other for a moment like two people recognizing a road they hadn't planned to take. She sat. He remained standing. She raised an eyebrow until he sat too. You sent men, she said. I apologize for that. She blinked. She had not expected apologize. Did that hurt? She asked. Saying that, the corner of his mouth moved. Slightly. She poured herself tea without waiting. He watched her do it with an expression that would have been unreadable to anyone who hadn't spent the night before studying his face in a newspaper photo. To Amara, it read as disarmed. You kept my shoe, she said. He reached into his jacket and placed a broken heel on the table between them. She picked it up. You could have just asked for my number. I don't ask for numbers. And yet here I am. She turned the heel over in her fingers. What did you want to say to me, Hyun-Soo Jang? I'm a graphic designer on a 4-month contract in Seoul. I'm very ordinary. What do you want with ordinary? The word ordinary landed wrong, and they both felt it. There was nothing ordinary about last night, and they both knew it. I don't know, he said. She looked up. I don't know. He repeated more quietly. That's the problem. I have not said those words in 8 years. I have an answer for everything. I built my life on having an answer for everything. He paused, looked at the rain tracking down the glass. And then you walked toward me and asked me to dance, and he stopped. And, she said softly, my hands were warm, he said, like it was an admission of something enormous. I had forgotten what that felt like. The rain intensified outside. Amara set down the broken heel and folded her hands around her tea. I should tell you, she said, that I am not a woman who gets involved in complicated things. I know, and you're the definition of complicated. I know that too. And yet you sent 2 men to my door without a please. I've already apologized for that. You have. She smiled slowly. So, here is what I will say. I'm in Seoul for 3 more months. I don't do fear and I don't do games. If you want to know me, know me. But you have to be a person about it. Not a dragon. Not a boss. A person. She extended her hand across the table. The same steady, unafraid gesture as the night before. Deal. He looked at her hand for 3 seconds. Then he shook it. The problem with Hyun-Soo Jang agreeing to be a person was that he was extremely out of practice. He sent a car instead of a text because he didn't have her number yet and asking for it felt. He didn't examine why it felt significant. Amara sent the car back and texted Ji-yeon, who texted Dong-won, who delivered the number to Hyun-Soo with the expression of a man who had seen everything and had still managed to be surprised. The first text read, "This is Amara. If you want to suggest meeting, use words, not vehicles." He stared at his phone for 4 minutes. He typed, "There is a gallery opening in Insadong on Thursday. I thought you might want to go." Her response came in 40 seconds. "Is this you asking me to accompany you or you informing me of an event?" Another pause. Then, asking, "Better. Yes. Pick me up at 7. And this time don't send an army." He did not send an army. He came himself, which was worse for his staff's blood pressure. The man who had not gone anywhere without full security detail in 8 years, sliding into a car alone and telling Dongwon, over his protests, to stay behind. She was waiting outside her building in a green coat and earrings that caught the street lights, eating from a paper bag of tteokbokki. And when he got out of the car, she looked him up and down and said, "You came yourself. I'm impressed." "You're surprised?" "I didn't say surprised. I said impressed." She offered him the bag. "Tteokbokki." He looked at the bag. "I don't eat street food." "Well," she started walking. "Tonight you do." He ate the tteokbokki. It was, though he would not have admitted it under any form of questioning, very good. The gallery was bright and full of souls art scene. Young curators, older collectors, everyone performing taste at each other. They moved through it side by side, and she was not the kind of person who tried to make conversation look smart. She said what she thought. She stood in front of a painting that was mostly gray circles for a full 2 minutes, then said, "I genuinely cannot tell if this is genius or a Tuesday." She caught him smiling. Actually smiling, not the faint controlled curve he'd been managing, but a real one, and she pointed at him triumphantly. "There it is. I knew there was a smile in there." "There isn't. I just saw it. It was beautiful. It had teeth." He looked away, but not before the smile happened again. They were walking through the last room when a man stepped into their path. Young, flush-faced, a press badge around his neck, phone already recording. "Mr. Jang, is this the woman from the gala? Are you two in a relationship? She's African, right? Can you confirm?" He hadn't finished the sentence before Hyun-soo stepped forward and the temperature of the room dropped. "Put the phone down," Hyun-soo said. Quietly. That was the worst part. How quiet it was. The journalist put the phone down. Amara put her hand on Hyun-soo's arm. One touch, firm and easy. His attention shifted to her. "It's all right," she said. "Let's just go." Outside, the night air was cold and clear. They walked half a block in silence before she said, "You were about to ruin someone's career over a bad question." He was. I know what he was. I've had bad questions before. I've had worse. She stopped walking and faced him. "You don't need to do that for me." "I wanted to." "I know." Something moved across her face. "That's different. But I'm not something to protect from words, Hyun-soo. I'm a person who handles her own." A pause. "You can want to protect me and let me handle it." He looked at her for a long moment. "That requires more restraint than I currently have." "Then practice," she said simply, and walked on, and after a moment he followed. 3 weeks passed. In 3 weeks, Seoul noticed. The tabloids ran photos. Comment sections went to war. Half the internet called Amara bold and brilliant. The other half said things that she read once, set her phone face down, made tea, and then picked the phone back up and kept living. She had survived worse battles in opinion sections, and she knew the difference between noise and danger. But the danger came anyway. It always did. Its name was Park Seo-yeon. She had been in Hyun-soo's orbit for years, an investor's daughter, part of his world, someone who had long assumed a particular future. She was sophisticated and calculated, and she had watched 3 weeks of newspaper photos with the kind of controlled smile that only forms on someone who has already decided on a plan. The first move was a dinner party, a mutual circle event, not technically hostile, and yet every seat placement was a message. Amara ended up across from Seo-yeon, who asked questions that sounded like small talk and cut like instruments. "Your contract is only until March, yes?" Seo-yeon said over the second course, very pleasantly. "April, actually," Amara said, "and then back to Lagos? Or London? Or somewhere else?" She took a sip of water. "I like options." How freeing. The smile stayed exactly the same. Hyun-soo is a man who values permanence, you know? Roots. He's not really built for temporary. The table quieted slightly. Amara set her glass down. She looked at Seo-yeon with the same clear, direct gaze she'd used to walk across a ballroom toward the most feared man in Seoul 3 weeks ago. "You know what I've noticed about permanent things?" she said. "They don't need to announce themselves. They just are." She smiled. "More duck, Seo-yeon. It's very good." She felt Hyun-soo's gaze on her from across the table. When she glanced over, his expression was controlled as always, but something in his eyes was, there was no other word for it, proud. That night, Leaving the dinner, he said, "We didn't need me in there." "I told you I don't." "I know." A pause as they reached the car. "It's the strangest thing." "What is?" "Usually when I'm not needed, I leave." He looked at her. "I don't want to leave." The city glittered around them. Somewhere a street musician was playing something low and melodic in the cold air. "Then don't," she said. The second move was worse. CO Yun leaked documents, not fabricated, but selectively edited, context stripped away, to a media outlet known for brutality. The story that ran was about Hyun Soo's business dealings 8 years ago, and the chaos after the accident, the decisions he'd made to survive and keep his people safe, the things he'd done that he wasn't proud of and had spent 8 years compensating for. The story framed them as ongoing, as active, as the kind of things that could make a certain 4-month contractor from Lagos very unwise to be near. Amara read the article at 6 a.m. She read it twice. She made her tea, and she sat at her window, and she thought. At 8 a.m., Hyun Soo appeared at her door. He didn't send anyone ahead. He came himself, and he looked like a man prepared to be told to leave, which was the most she had ever seen of his interior life on his exterior face. "I know why you're here," she said, stepping back to let him in. "You read it." "I read it." She handed him tea. He took it automatically, like her apartment had trained him. "Most of it is distortion," he said, "but not all of it." "I know." He looked at her. "I know, Hyun Soo. I'm not 22. I knew who you were before I ever walked across that ballroom." She sat. "What I want to know is who you're trying to become. That's the part that matters." He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the street outside cycled through a bus and a school bell and a delivery bike. Then he sat across from her, and for the first time, he told her. Not the version he told business partners, or the version in the official record. The real version. The accident, and who was in the car besides him. The months that followed, the grief so deep it had no floor, and the man he'd had to become to stay alive inside it. The choices. The things he wished he had done differently. The wall, brick by brick, its reasons and its cost. She listened without performing the listening. She didn't say, "I understand," or "that must have been so hard." She just listened until he was done, and then she said, "You built the wall to survive. You survived. Now the question is whether you want to live." He looked at her. "That's what you do to me," he said. "You ask that question just by existing." "I know." She tilted her head. "Is that okay?" A long beat. "Yes," he said, and it sounded like something had been unbuilt. The third move came without warning, as third moves do. CO Yun had contacts in the business world that connected to Amara's soul contract. A quiet word, a suggestion, a call to the firm's Korean partner about complications arising from their employees' high-profile entanglements. Amara got a meeting request from her manager that felt wrong from the subject line. She walked into it and walked out 20 minutes later having been offered a graceful early exit. A generous buyout. The message beneath the message perfectly clear. Leave now. Leave cleanly. This stops here. She went home and sat with it. She was not a woman who needed rescuing. She had built her career on her own, moved to a new country on her own, walked into rooms where she didn't belong on her own. She had never needed a man to stand between her and the world. But she called him, not because she couldn't handle it, because she wanted him to know, because somewhere in the past weeks, he had become one of the people she told things to, and she wanted to tell him this. He answered on the second ring. "Someone's trying to move me off the board," she said. A pause. Then, very quietly, "Tell me." She told him. He listened the way she had taught him to listen, without filling it with solutions, just hearing. When she finished, he said, "What do you want to do?" "Now I'll handle it. Now let me fix this." "What do you want to do?" She closed her eyes for a moment. "I want to stay," she said. "I want to finish my contract. I want to not let someone rearrange my life because she's afraid of something she can't control." "Then you stay," he said. "You can't just. I'm not going to do anything dramatic. I have a very good lawyer, and CO Yun's business interests have 3 complications she'd rather not have highlighted." A pause. "It will be handled. Quietly. Professionally. Hyun Soo, you said you weren't something to be protected from words. That is true. But interference with your professional contract is not a word. That's an action." His voice was measured, calm. "You fight your battles. I'll fight mine. This one was started in my direction." She sat with that. All right, she said finally. Are you all right? She thought about it honestly. Yes, she said. Actually, yes. Good. A beat. Amara. Yes. I would like to take you somewhere this weekend. Somewhere quiet. No staff. No cameras. Another beat, like he was choosing words carefully. I want to show you something. What is it? A place I go when I need to remember I'm alive, he said. I haven't taken anyone there before. She let the significance of that settle. Okay, she said softly. Show me. It was a house in the hills north of the city, old and modest compared to everything else he owned. Wooden floors, a wide veranda overlooking a valley that turned gold in the afternoon light. It had belonged to his mother, and before her, her parents. He had kept it and never sold it and never brought anyone there since the accident, not once. They drove up on Saturday morning, the city dissolving behind them, the air changing from exhaust and ambition to pine and cold sky. When they arrived, he unlocked the door and stepped back and let her walk in first, and she moved through the rooms slowly, touching nothing, taking it in. In the main room, there was a record player on a wooden cabinet. Old, cared for. Does it work? She asked. Yes. She found the crate of records beside it. She flipped through them, eyebrows rising. Jazz, mostly. Some older Korean folk music. At the back, a well-worn record in a plain sleeve. What's this one? He came and looked. Something passed through his face. My mother's favorite. I don't, he stopped. I haven't played it since she passed. Amara held it out to him. Not pushing, just offering. He took it. He stood there for a moment, then set on the player. Lowered the needle. The music that came out was slow and clear and old. A woman's voice and a piano, the melody wandering like it had nowhere it needed to be. They stood in the afternoon light and listened. Then Amara extended her hand. Third time. The same gesture, the same steady, unafraid eyes. Dance with me, she said. He took her hand. This time, there was no audience. No ballroom, no crowd, no cameras. Just wooden floors and afternoon gold and a song that had lived in this house for decades, waiting for someone to play it again. He moved differently than the first time. Less frozen, less like a man doing battle with his own body. He moved like someone letting something go. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She just danced with him, unhurried, while outside the valley went gold, and then copper, and then the quiet blue of early evening. When the song ended, neither of them stepped back. Amara, he said, and his voice had none of the control in it, none of the carefully managed distance. I know, she said quietly. I don't know how to do this. I've forgotten. I know that too. She looked up at him. You're not the only one, you know. I came here to work, not to. She paused. I'm not someone who falls easily. But I'm falling. She said it plainly, the way she said everything. And I've stopped arguing with it. He looked at her face for a long time, like he was memorizing it, or confirming something, or doing both at once. Then he said, I would like very much to not lose this. Whatever this is, it's the start of something, she said. That's all we know right now. Is that enough? She considered him, this man who had spent 8 years as a stone in a river, letting everything move around him, and who was now, visibly, inconveniently, beautifully, being moved. For now, she said, it's everything. In the city below, the tabloids were running new theories. Co Yun was meeting with her lawyers about the 3 complications that had surfaced quietly and professionally. Dongwon was in an office somewhere managing 14 things simultaneously and pretending not to be relieved. And in the house in the hills, the record played through to the end. And then Amara put it back and found another one, and they stayed through the evening, talking and not talking, making food in an old kitchen and eating it on the veranda in the dark with the lights of the city far below, like a second sky. And Hyun Soo Jang laughed, not once, not quietly, but 3 times freely, his head back, the sound of it new and strange and absolutely himself. And each time Amara looked at him with the expression of someone watching something rare return to the world. Neither of them talked about contracts ending or cities left or what happened in April. April was April. Tonight was tonight. The valley was quiet. The stars were out. And somewhere in the city, the man who had been called the frozen dragon of Hannam for 8 long years was sitting on a wooden veranda, eating cold rice with a woman who had walked across a room and asked him to dance, and the ice was gone. Not broken, not shattered, melted. That's the thing about the right kind of warmth. It doesn't destroy what it touches. It just reminds it how to move. And that's where we leave them tonight. One woman who walked in looking for nothing, and one man who didn't know he was looking for everything. Thank you so much for watching Episode 1. Episode 2 is coming soon. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. If you enjoyed this story, please like and share. See you next time.